everybody to another episode of the MyData webinar. Today's webinar is actually quite a cooperative one. As we can see, we are recording this session, and I'm pleased to let you know that you have colleagues from other hubs. So we have the Brussels or Belgium hub represented by Paul, and we have Netherlands represented by Marley. So thank you very much for helping in organizing and preparing that. So it's increasingly a pleasure to have the colleagues from other locations here. So it's really a joint hub, and we are going increasingly into this direction. So a few words about MyData, so everybody knows what we are doing. For those who haven't been attending, I make it rather quick. You will get all the slides with the recording after that. So I go rather quickly through these things. MyData is about personal data, and the previous logo very nicely showed that. So my personal data is actually everywhere, so I don't go through all the details here. Then there's a lot of discussion about personal data and digital space, and at the very beginning of personal data, the situation was pretty chaotic, so it was very API-centric. In the old days, I call that the data stone age. Then over time, we had the big tech companies using their servers to store the personal data, so it was more organization-centric. So that was sort of the data middle age, and it's going increasingly to be human-centric, which has a privacy by design, and that's an increasingly important concept going forward. There are various concepts, and very important one are the MyData operators. So these are actually the fiduciaries of the personal data, and there can be certifications for MyData operators. I have a few examples here. I don't go through all of them, but these are all made to protect the data privacy of the individuals. It's also covered by the EU Data Governance Act, so you can look it up for yourself. Rather quickly moving forward. So coming to the representatives, we started out in MyData Hub Zurich. It was André Gollier who initiated that, who attended one of the first events in Helsinki, and we founded that in 2019. It's very closely related to the Swiss Data Alliance, and André in his capacity is also the president of the Swiss Data Alliance. We are focusing in Switzerland on the hands-on part, and the Swiss Data Alliance is more on the policy-making part. And we have everything on LinkedIn now. We started on a different platform, but we are now on LinkedIn. And very freshly, we have a new participant and a new member of our leadership team. It's Jonas Berci. Unfortunately, he can't make it today due to family obligations, but we will have a separate event where we introduce our colleagues. Just to let you know where we are on LinkedIn now, and we have a so-called company. LinkedIn-wise, it's a company where we have all our events announced. So you can see a screenshot. If you go to this site, then you can see on the events what has been prepared. So we have 3 events coming up, and we have a sub-page, which is a showcase in LinkedIn terms. We are more focusing on open data matters there, so it's called local data ecosystem. So depending on the topic, it will be on the one or the other platform. We also have a YouTube channel, and it's also linked in the main page. And we have one channel, but there are several playlists which separate by topic, so you can easily find all the material. So we have about almost 20 recordings in the meantime. Then I'm very pleased to have our guest from Brussels, represented by Paul, who will also be our presenter. Would you like to say a few words about your Brussels hub?
Yes, hi, James. Paul Theyskens here. Welcome to everyone. I am one of the founders, together with Ruben and Jeff, on the Brussels hub. And we started in 2018. And then there was a lot of activity over the last few years. And currently the hub as a community is idling as a status because we haven't founded a legal entity to run the hub, but that's something that we're working on. But there's a lot of activity in Belgium. There is currently 3 MyData operators, and also what's very important, the Flanders government, Flanders government is establishing a personal data utility company. And that's something that will be brought before Parliament, hopefully by the end of the year, that will enable this as part of the data economy model of Flanders. So myself, I'm a business architect working for IMEC, which is a large research and technology operator in Belgium, and working for Mobility MaaS Alliance, Mobility as a Service Alliance, as a work group leader for technology and standards. My colleague Rikken is working for Data Village, which is one of the MyData operators. There is Data Village, there is Mico in Belgium, there is Jeans.com. And then hopefully soon to be added the Flanders Digital Government Agency as a MyData operator. So that is the status, a lot of projects in Brussels. And we hope to establish our hub officially as a community, but we're kind of discussing, should the Brussels hub be taking care of European business, or is this really local Belgian initiative? That's something what we're thinking about, but a lot of activity, Peter.
Very good. So that sounds like a few more webinars about the topic. With that said, thank you very much. And moving on right to Netherlands, Marlies, thank you very much for making yourself available. So you can certainly say a few words about your hub.
Yes, thank you, Peter. Yeah, so MyData Hub Netherlands, it's quite similar, I think, the position we have as Brussels. So we have, public organizations joining us, but also operators and also just parties in the field that are interested in the topic of MyData, personal data, and everything around it. So we've been hosting meetings on this topic since 2019 and maybe even before it as well, before we became a hub together. And it was me when I still worked at Innovalor. I'm now working at Surf. I started it up together with Peter Eikelboom, who works for one of the operators, Irma in the Netherlands, and Koen de Jong at Innovalor. And we've been mostly focused on knowledge sharing in our hub. So we noticed that the parties that are interested in MyData, they're all working on the same topic, but not necessarily always in the know about each other's initiatives, but they are very relevant for each other. So we've become very much a space for knowledge sharing and also networking. And we noticed that especially the people in public organizations appreciate that they have a spot that is quite neutral for them, where they can talk to the operators, so they can have a space to engage in a more free format discussion with each other. So that's been very appreciative on both sides. And you can find us on LinkedIn as well. We have a group where we post our activities, and feel free to talk to me if you're interested in Netherlands Hub activities further. So back to you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we just discovered in the briefing that you have a very interesting topic, so which smells like another webinar as well. So I'll certainly approach you for this one. So with that, I'll just give you a quick intro into the upcoming events. We have quite a few one. The topic depends a little bit on the subject area. So we are on the healthcare side. On the 7th of December, we have do's and don'ts of personal health data with Bram Stieltjes. He's the data managing specialist from the University Hospital of Basel. A very close relationship with him. Then in January, we have privacy challenge of diabetes, which is also healthcare related. It's a joint event from Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and Switzerland about the different cultures. And we have one about data literacy with Paul Mera, who is a sort of a data transformation evangelist in the city of Zurich. And we have more coming up, so we have not yet specific dates, but one, as I announced it already, will be a sort of a relaunch of the Zurich hub. There's quite a bit going on about data spaces here in Switzerland, so more about that in the future. Then one which is already in the planning, which is real world data and healthcare, which is very important for the pharmaceuticals research. Then more about data literacy, which is a very important topic. And then I'm working with Sönke from ZAR. I just had a call with him before that meeting. So with him, we are more into local data ecosystems, planning events for January. And one is not yet so specific. It's about digital billing and self-sovereign identity. So quite a number of ideas coming up, topics, they're enough topics actually. With that said, I would really like to do a little commercial for the MyData Global. So it's a non-profit organization. If you want to support these activities, you can join the MyData organization. They're also doing interesting webinars and also a conference. So it's a very good community if you like to join or contribute. Otherwise, that's the link to go there. And with that, we are already approaching the program. So tonight, Paul is going to present after my introduction about data spaces. Then we have a discussion. So we make it 1 hour straight. So it's not too long here in the evening, but Paul is available after the official part. So whenever somebody wants to discuss in more detail, we are still here, and then we make it as long as everybody has energy. Before I pass the word, Paul, as he mentioned already, he's coming from the Brussels hub, and he's the working group leader of technology and standards. And with that pretty short intro from my side, Paul, the floor is yours, so you can take over.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'll just share my slides. I'll put them in full screen if I can make it happen. Is it working okay? Can you see my slides?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, so the agenda, I'll first of all tell something about what's going on in the development of data spaces. Me personally, I'm working on mobility in a number of initiatives, both for IMEC in Belgium as for MaaS Alliance and for a number of other initiatives around mobility. But also I'm a volunteer for MyData, and I'll explain what's happening, what I'm doing in data spaces, some touch points with why it is important for the MyData community, and some aspects on roadmap. It take about half an hour, and that's what I wanted to do. Just to start out with, Peter, some background on data spaces. This is a slide from the European data strategy, where you see that in the data strategy, first, there was a rule book created, a cloud rule book. Then Digital Europe program was founded, which brought out a number of calls for data spaces. And on the right side, you see the common European data spaces that are being defined, which automatically is connected to the Data Space Support Center, in which MyData is participant in defining what is now happening as we speak, the blueprint for data spaces. Next to that, on the other side of the slides, on the left side, next to the European Common Data Spaces, there's also what we call the next generation cloud that is needed on a European scale, which actually allows Europe to move towards the data sovereignty targets that we're all looking for. And in combination with the data strategy, the initiatives on European data spaces, there is also public-private initiatives that's been undertaken called gaia-x, started by Germany and France, which are looking at use cases, at technical architecture for infrastructure, and also at how can we set up a number of open source federated services and interoperability that can allow us to bring all of this together to realize the EU data strategy. Now, on the next slide, a bit of an overview. It's a bit dated, but still you can see the priority data spaces that have been formed, which is around health, manufacturing, industry, agriculture, finance, mobility, Green Deal, energy, public administration, and skills. And a number of others have, meanwhile, like tourism, have been added to this list. And what you see on below that image is that all of these data spaces need cross-sectoral personal data to connect to these data spaces. And that's why, where I think it becomes very relevant for MyData to participate and to make sure that we can share our personal data in a context of security and European sustainability and societal impact. What we see that there's a lot of activity. There's about 200 different organizations in Europe currently on research and technology, academics, government institutions, public and private people working on initiatives like gaia-x, the IDSA, International Data Spaces Association, Open Day, which is the working group that defined design principles for, on which you see on the left side, design principles for data spaces, the Data Spaces Business Alliance, National Access Point for Data and National Access Point Core. And all of these initiatives, DTLF is about the Digital Transport and Logistics Forum. So those organizations, about 200 of them, have been working over the last 3 to 4 years on the architectures and the services that we need for this digital economy and these common data spaces and cloud infrastructure that we need. Now, just to take a step back, because it all smells a bit like IT and IT platforms, we have to look at the data space not as an IT platform. It's not an IT platform. It is a way to collaborate. It is a way for organizations to securely share data, to securely cooperate, and to make sure that we increase trust, that we can share identity, that we can be compliant with policy, but also that we can create interoperability between the ecosystem of our European data economy. And so there's a number of important pillars to these to this data space. First of all, in order to collaborate and share data, you need to be able to discover data. You need to be able to find data. If I'm a developer, or if I'm a business that wants to make a new business and reuse what's already there from another company, I have to be able to discover it. So we have to have a catalog that automatically, if I enter a query into a search engine, will give me what is available that I can use. There has to be mechanisms to share, but also to control. If I want to participate, and I'm, for instance, I would say a player in the market like TomTom or Google or any other party, we want to make sure that if we participate in such a data space or in such a data sharing initiative, that we gain control of who has access to our data and that we are sure that this is safe, this is not being misused, and that we can make an agreement with the one who is using our data. There's a number of other important facts about data space. First of all, each participant must remain in control of their own identity and be able to define how they want to participate. They decide who to trust or whatever business they want to do in that data space. On the right side, also important, under which policy that their data is being shared, or I want to also, as a participant, I want to control my roadmap myself. And that's a number of those, what we call decentralized principles, are the basis of a data space. Now, to go a little bit deeper on what it is, this is a visual of the international data spaces data architecture on a high-level view. And so what we have, for instance, we have a data owner. Let's say that you are a small provider of services to a market. You have in a specific market like healthcare or skills or agricultural services, you have some interesting data that you would like to share because you want to collaborate better with some of the other companies in your sector. Then it's important that you are able to, in the data spaces, you are able to use a connector, as they call it, an IDS, an International Data Space Connector, which is open source, which is available freely, in which you can define the rules for which your data can be shared. So you can open up without any risk. And also you can put in policies already. There is a rule book, there is a number of things already defined, and a number of open source services that these 200 organizations over the last 4 years have been creating to be able to onboard as a data owner. On the other side, there is a data user. Let's say I'm a small company. I look at mobility. I'm a service provider that wants to offer local mobility services to the people in my city, in my town. Then I can connect to data sources, and I should be able to do that from my office and log in and be able to connect and use that data and integrate it into my app or whatever service that I want to offer very easily without too much integration, and where this system allows me to grow in the future without constantly having a large integration cost of doing it in the old way. Now, what does the data space also, next to this secure connection with IDS connectors, what does this service, this data space also offer? Is that there are a number of what we call generic services that they offer that are very important. One of them is the vocabulary. A vocabulary allows any participant, both on the data sharing side as on the data user side, to talk the same language. We have defined over the last few years a vocabulary based on semantic web standards that allow everyone to quickly connect between one app and another app, between one provider of services or data and another. So these generic services like vocabulary, like identity, which is important. We have to be able to connect very rapidly and also be sure that everybody that uses the system is logged in and has a certain security level that protects all of the players in the market. There is an app store provider, there is a broker, but also another example is there is a clearinghouse already defined with rules, with the automatic ability for a data owner who owns data and wants to create a new market, wants to expose their data assets to for instance, a marketplace. There is already some clearinghouse definitions which you can connect to, a service that you can use. So automatically you can send a bill to this reuser in the marketplace, in the data space. And so this is a general overview of what has been going on with a number of organizations. And why is this important? We believe that it's a unique moment at this moment for digital transformation and system change in our market. And Europe is investing 1.4 billion over the next few years in these common data spaces, in local living labs to experiment, to set up bootstrapped, as we call it, to set up minimum value data spaces, but also in digital twins, which I will explain very shortly. Now, how does this happen in practice? For instance, this is from the mobility data space that is now live in Germany since 2 months. You can connect, so the parking spot management service opens with a connector to the data space, and automatically they can expose parking data, car data. A mobility service provider of shared mobility such as steps or bikes or shared cars or public transport. The traffic control system can open up data on smart traffic lights, for instance, and all of these are opened up and they manage their own data. They don't require a lot of IT integration because in a decentralized system, the data owner still remains responsible for the quality and the easiness of integration of their data. Now, for MyData, why do I put this on the slide as well? Is that what we see is that more and more citizen science data is being connected to the internet and being shared in such a mobility data space. In Belgium, for instance, we have a number of examples that I will show later, but they can also create a connector. And in this way, a data pod or a data store provider, a MyData operator, can also connect with a connector to the data space and reuse some of those components like identity management and others to participate and to, let's say, share our personal data under control of a secure MyData operator certified organization. This as an introduction. So then I want to talk a little bit about what has already been developed. What open source services are already available today. So the IDSA already has a reference architecture. This is a bit outdated. It's 4.0 now. You can go to IDSA, you can download the architecture and you can implement it. If you're a developer or an IT guy, you can implement it by tomorrow morning, let's say, have your first data space up and running that can connect to any other data space and you can start your business. IDSA also has certification so that it is a trustworthy and certified organization that shares rules. and that shares certification. There is rule books created for mobility. For instance, in Finland, the Finnish Transport Authority created a rule book for mobility and exchange of data within a mobility context. A lot of work has been done. There is a GitHub, there are connectors available which you can use, there are schemes. And also there is on the business side, and that's what's important, it's not just about ITers. It's about, as we said, it's about collaborative business, legal, technology and societal collaboration. So they also create use case radars. They talk about use cases that are already there, that are proven, and that can be reused in other areas. Because one of the key components of and the key advantages of a data space is that anything that is ever developed in a data space can be replicated to another data space in another region without much effort. There has been some generic building blocks on interoperability, on trust, on data value, on governance. And this has all been available, and if needed, always we have a big repository and knowledge that we can share for people who want to read up and want to start working on it. Now, where are we today? Where are we now, end of 2022? We are setting up what we call third generation platforms. We started 10 years ago with IoT smart city platforms, then we had open data, then we moved towards what we call digital twins. Digital twins, like shown here on the right side, is a model project of IMEC in Belgium, which is visualizing already multimodal traffic flows for all types of traffic flows in a city. And that can detect, for instance, air quality, and that can detect traffic jams, and that can already visualize the problem of a certain industry, if it's around health, if it's around mobility. And that is what we call a second generation. A third generation, what's happening today is that we are starting to predict that based on this digitalized digital twin, which is currently more being dashboarded as showing a multimodal digital view of the actual situation, we can now start predicting. We can now start saying, like, what if we close down this bridge? What if we do this? What if we do that? And predict the effect on traffic, predict the effect on healthcare, predict the effect on air quality. And so what is important there is that data spaces being set up are the basis of sharing all of the data that we need to power these digital twins and to enable data sharing with some, that's also an important factor, sustainable urban mobility plans, sustainable urban plans, and sustainable development goals that we have, as all of you might know, in the zero emissions target that we have on a European scale. Now, one of these very successful initiatives funded by Europe was the Open Digital Twin, open source software piloted in Ghent already today, doing simulations. What would happen if we close the bridge in Athens, in Pilsen in Czechia? And all of these are open and can be shared, and a number of use cases are put up in what we call living labs for continuous improvement, because this has to evolve and come to a continuous evolution. On a high level architecture, we see that all of the data, high velocity, low velocity data, is connected to data spaces. And next to that, on top of that, digital twins are put up in all urban environments in Europe. And there you have open local digital twins and data and AI management to be able, what we call a decision support tool, to be able to create future infrastructure or future policy interventions on a European, on a local, on a regional level, on the city level, to be data-driven and sustainable for the future. Some of the projects, we're currently setting up a very big project that just got awarded all over Europe in a number of cities, in Brussels, in Mechelen for Belgium, in which we're going to connect all of mobility data. I'm talking about mobility because it is relevant for as a vertical to show the opportunity, but of course there are other important data spaces on healthcare, on a number of others that can be even relevant as this one. So connecting all the data of pedestrians, bike flow, car and truck flow, and multimodal flow on different kinds of people like paratransit users, people with a mobility impairment, allows us to get more data, which is what we need for AI. And in order to do that, we can do experiments like, for instance, where do we have to build new bike lanes? Based on, currently we're implementing Strava data from all of the bikes to detect where are the safety problems for bikers, where are bike delay problems, and where do we have, for instance, too many bikers for a certain amount of physical space. So that, for instance, in the city of Mechelen, we can now predict that at 6 o'clock we need to open, or we need to free one more car lane dynamically because there's too many bikers on that specific physical place that is available. So that's some of the examples of the living labs we're setting up. Just being granted, as said, we're setting up a data space for a number of cities. And this project called Sitcom, which is in a number of countries, in Belgium, in Holland, in Luxembourg, in Eindhoven in Holland, in Luxembourg, and in France, in Belgium, in the cities Brussels and Mechelen, around multimodal mobility, in the Netherlands around traffic management, in Eindhoven, in Luxembourg around electromobility, and in France around autonomous vehicles, and in the number of others in the Nordics and in the South node. We will focus on a number of these enabling digital twin and data spaces trials and pilots. It's a 5-year project, and we invite everyone in the business to come and see if we can help each other on going towards what we call the urban experiments that are powered by sustainability plans that every city, every municipality has today. And this has to do with space allocation, with promoting modal shift, reducing the emissions that we all have, but also to come in line with local priorities and local priorities of citizens. The German mobility data space, as said, Germany has been on the forefront of development. They already have a number of success stories. German mobility data space went live in April. So they have BMW already sharing data, Caruso, Fireware, open source marketplace, and open source component services. Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, looking at sharing data to increase security, to improve the quality of mobility on an urban area. And so the mobility data space in Germany is also open for other business. A data space is a collaboration. So all of those things can also be implemented in any other country, in any other city, reusing those same components. To end up my explanation, now why is this important for my data and for the community? I've taken the example of an active tourist like myself that is a digital nomad over the last few years. So I spent a lot of time in Spain and also in Helsinki to visit my data. And so if I could share my data, this is an example of my smartphone. This is a company called Motion Tag, but there's also an open source version of this, which automatically, based on my smartphone sensors, tracks what I do, which mode, if I go on foot, if I take a bike, if I take a bus, if I take my car, whatever mode I'm in, automatically profiles me and shares all of that data of my movements with the city. So if I can share that data with a personal data store of a MyData operator, or a solid pod of the Solid initiative that is now officially a project of the Flanders government, who have the intention to give a pod to every citizen in Flanders. This allows us to share it with the city and with the digital twin to get an overview of what's happening. In the same way, this personal data pod, as explained before, is connected to the data space. And then, this is an example from Helsinki. It is added, crowdsourced, and user mobility data is crowdsourced and shared with the digital twin for mobility of the city. They can visualize, they can predict traffic flows, and they can, this is an example from Antwerp. We have 3 digital twins up and running in Flanders, in Ghent, in Antwerp, and I think in Mechelen, but I could be wrong, don't shoot me for that, so that we can predict traffic flows and actually manage it for modal shift. Some of the use cases already in Switzerland, we see that Switzerland is always seems to be a bit ahead if it goes on experimenting with this kind of technology. We see that, for instance, in Winterthur, there is no real good data available on bikers today. Based on the motion tag, they have created what they call bike usage data for the city of Winterthur. So what they do is they give all of the bikers who share their data free public transport, and they get the data to visualize bike paths and bike problems. The BVG, which is another implementation, they have used data of the citizen to calculate fares. So for instance, if you're a tourist, and that's why it's interesting for me, if I'm a tourist and I share my data, maybe I can get free public transport for my stay if I'm in Helsinki or in this specific one in Berlin. What we also see is that due to our systemic crisis over the last year, my electricity bill in Belgium has gone up from 2,000 to 6,500 for an average house with 3 people in it. We see that the governments are looking at ways out. And so in Germany, they've introduced a €9 ticket, and the €9 ticket has been quite a success. And sharing your data with the government allows you then to things like what Austria is doing, offering a Klima ticket to people who want to share their data with the data space. CityLab in the US experimenting with things like basic income. If you share your data, you get a basic package, like a utility, like an energy utility, like the basic housing programs. It's a basic mobility program. Now, what do we think is on the program? What I believe in personally is that we need more citizen data scientist participation. We have, for instance, Telram is in Belgium, 5,000 people buy a sensor, they attach it to their window, and they share around school environments. What is the traffic volume? What is the traffic made of? What kind of cars? What kind of is there danger areas? And so they share this. Citizen sensors. We have a bike data project to enable us to create this, what we call floating bike data, which is not available at this moment. And so there was an open source bike data project, which people can share all their rights, like what amateur bikers are doing with their Strava, but do this in an open source, and it's gaining momentum, and connecting that as an extra data set to the mobility of a city and a region is a next step. But of course, to be incentivized for the user. Next on the evolution is what we call personal digital twin. What we are now moving towards, what we say the level 3, platforms, is that we have come from descriptive analytics and digital transformation of basics that we have done over the last number of years, going to diagnostics, digital twins, and now we are here in predictive analytics, but the future is in prescriptive analytics that actually will finally help me manage my mobility agenda, promote me user-centric, human-centric of where I want to go. And so there we see that this, what we call third-generation agent-driven platforms are in development, but we think it's still a few years out. We also see that from mobility, we want to connect to tourism, that automatically I can use and share and integrate with tourism, because that's important. If I visit Helsinki, that I get good tourism connections, that I don't, like in Barcelona, there's a big problem because every day, I don't know how many thousand people want to visit the Sagrada Familia's church. There has to be some way to become data-driven to offer you a better service. On energy, if I want energy and Green Deal, the citizen should be at the center of integration to enable this better economy, to enable us to reduce carbon, to reduce traffic jams, but also to mobilize and to become inclusive and to see that we get better jobs in view of our societal goals that we put together. So The European agenda is pretty straight. We are now at the moment in preparatory actions for a lot of the data spaces. We're setting up living labs in all of these countries, which is called a Testing and Experimentation Facility, TEF, for AI. And there's a number of implementation calls for data spaces coming up in 2023. Some data spaces calls are now open. So the manufacturing deployment call, that means actual deployment, is open and will be closed in 24th of January. The media, the mobility DataSpace, which I'm working on personally in a consortium of a number of people in academics and government in Europe, which we will make a proposal for the 24th of January. And also the smart communities deployment call, which is a cascading call. So that means that this call will be opening for small and medium-sized enterprises and for other market players. If you have an idea of something you want to implement for smart communities using data space, digital twins, and this technology that is relevant for data sharing. So for 2023 to 24, there's a Green Deal data space deployment. So you see all of these deployment calls of Europe that are going to be opened in the next year or two. That means that this is not about piloting, this is not about research, this is actual about deployment in 3 to 4 years, that after the pilot testing in a living lab, it will be automatically required to become an operational platform for Digital Europe after that period. So that's an important statement. And so to round up, I hope you found it interesting, but for me, we are currently at an important moment for the human-centric digital economy in Europe. Implementing data sharing and creation of sustainable business, legal, technology, and societal platforms need to be demand-based, need to be citizen-centric, with the citizen at the center of the center point of integration. Just in the same way that big tech has shown us over the past 20 years, it's Google Maps didn't get to 90% market share in mobility navigation on smartphone because they only got there because they're so much citizen-centric and getting you there in time, that this technology and this approach needs to happen in that way. A question for me was that Peter sent was, where will we be in 10 years? And then for me, I believe that digital transformation maturity level, if I compare to some other industries, like media, we are still low. In media, there's been a lot of evolving. In other industries and in general in our society, we're still at a low maturity level. Still a lot needs to be digitized before we can start prescribing our AI-based future. And also, what I believe is that the data spaces and digital twins, together with this new digital governance models, like the digital commons that Europe now made a priority for next year to think about. So how are they going to set up a digital commons so that our data is governed by a institution that has us as a central focus for creation and no longer institutions or governments or private companies. This will be developed in over the next few years as the maturity evolves. But again, this will require continuous improvement, continuous learning, as said by Marlies and Peter as well. And this in a co-creative way, in the ecosystem, in an open ecosystem way, starting today. Now, I wouldn't really refer to Jeff Bezos as my role model, but what he says sometimes is something that we should think about. His saying every day is day one is for us the same. So we cannot get started earlier on proving on what we are doing. And that's, I think, was my last slide. So I thank you for your attention. I hope you found it interesting, and I give the word back to Peter, if there are any.
Thank you very much, Paul. Really very interesting indeed. Of course, there are a number of questions before I have a ton of questions, but I would like to give a chance to the audience to ask questions. Are there any burning questions right away? I think everybody's very impressed, so am I. Actually, I'm very glad to hear that Switzerland is so innovative. I wasn't really aware that Winterthur has this program, so glad to hear that, glad to learn that. What comes to my mind when I see the citizen data, that's obviously quite a cultural question. So we all know we can do a lot if the data is available. On the other hand, there are concerns about the privacy. And it's actually quite interesting that you're using the citizen data. What is your experience about the acceptance of using the citizens data? And I can tell you why I'm asking this question. In Switzerland specifically, people are very cautious how they make the personal data available. How is that being adopted in various countries? And Paul, since you're traveling the world, you have certainly a pretty good overview of that.
Well, I'm traveling most of in Europe, especially over the last few years. We haven't been able to do a lot of transatlantic voyaging, which now slowly is coming back. But anyway, to give you my perspective on that, I think personally that if I look at the initiative like the Bike Data Challenge and the data that we're currently as users, as citizens are using in a lot of apps, if it's Strava, if it's a number of other apps, if they help me with my personal goals, then I'm inclined. And if I know that they are safe, then I'm inclined to do that. So in order to start, let's say from designing such a service, it has to be designed privacy by default, and it has to. That's why I'm connecting it to the DataSpace initiative as well, because I believe that the 200 organizations that are now working on creating this ecosystem in Europe, a number of them, like CITIP in Leuven, which is a specialist of University of Leuven, KU Leuven, one of the specialists working on the DataSpace Support Center as well, they specifically need to come to a better legislation on privacy, because we see that what we have been doing today, like GDPR, didn't really have the effect that we as citizens can be proud of. Because to give an example, if I look at my last month, I think I clicked 2,000 times on a yes button to give my data to I don't know who for whatever content that I wanted to view. Now, this is the exact opposite of putting the user in control, which was the GDPR intention. So if we design better services that actually inform from the start the citizen on what is happening, who does what with my data, and what happens after that, and is this data being resold or is this data being given to someone else, that should be the basis of creating such a service. And that's why, for instance, in mobility, on this data sharing app that I've shown you, the French have already established what we call a Mon Compte Mobilité, so a My Mobility account, in which they have standardized it from the French state with a number of mobility institutions, which takes mobility as a service and privacy as a central point. And this is now being implemented in a number of cities like Rennes, Mulhouse, and a number of others in a data sharing experiment. One of the initiatives in France is around what we know carpooling. So if you can prove that you are in a car with someone else, you get a tax benefit for carpooling. Now, the only way you can do that is to connect, like we are doing a lot in Belgium, connect with your identity to a France Connect or other validated identity that is trusted or validated by the government, and that you officially share this data, like we are all doing in our society. And so there, it's important to have that identity and trust and security and privacy already baked in and thought about when you start such an initiative. And so this is also being developed, being open sourced in France to be reused by others. And this is an example of, we don't go lightly, we focus on the user. Like in any digital transformation project, you focus on the user and on the problem to solve. You focus on the citizen and the problem to solve. You do design thinking, you do customer journey mapping, and then you define the requirements on the, for instance, the information and the transparency of the service you want to provide to your user, showing him also what benefit is there for them to enjoy, why they should use this service. But that's my opinion, and of course, we are in an open society where we have to solve some of those problems.
Okay, somebody wants to ask a question. I just asked a question right away. So
No problem. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Nuria de Lama. I work for International Data Corporation, IDC, which is the market intelligence company. And I'm following the topic of data spaces. First of all, thank you very much for the very comprehensive presentation. I'm personally involved in some of the projects that have been mentioned in the presentation, some of these support actions to define a bit the design of the data spaces. In particular, I'm following the one of manufacturing, tourism, and Green Deal. And first of all, we see like a difficulty for many companies to understand what a data space is and the business models or the business motivation to share data. I like very much the use cases you've presented with the citizen in the center, because I see a lot of potential cases for a citizen sharing data, but for many companies, it is not so clear why to share data with others that they normally conceive as competitors. Having said that, and I would like to jump to a more technical question still, and even though I follow some of these and gaia-x discussions, not in so much detail, but still, I have difficulties to understand how a data space will look like from a technical point of view. Will it be, in your opinion, just a peer-to-peer thing, or will there be any kind of common infrastructure that will need to be maintained by an operator or something? How do you see that?
Yeah, so in the data spaces bootstraps that we're now thinking of, for instance, we have the city of Brussels and Mechelen. There, the principle is that the data source owner is hosting their own data, and so the data space will actually have implementations at the source of where the data is to be shared. So, for instance, if it's about mobility, the business of a public transport operator in Brussels, they will have to create a connector, and they will have to create a catalog item, so the reusers can automatically access the data at their premise. So all of the data basically stays at their premises, and some central services within a data space need to be set up, such as the identity management service is something that the data space can manage or host. The data catalog could be something that the data space organization that organizes it, like the German Mobility DataSpace is also an organization that organizes a data space to which people onboard into that data space. And so the definition of what it needs to be hosted where is something that needs to be worked out for every data space. I don't know if this makes sense, what I'm saying to you, but
yeah, it makes sense.
In principle, for this project Sitcom that I showed you, which is about setting up living labs for AI in mobility in a number of cities in Europe, there we will set up bootstrapped data spaces for the cities of Brussels and Mechelen, and the Brussels IT department and the Mechelen IT department, they will host their own data space that will process and manage their own local data. But of course, they also have to publish it to any other reuser. For instance, there is a national access point mandated by European Directive for Mobility, which is a national access point for mobility in every country. So if you have a data space in a city like Brussels, they will also have to publish that data with metadata and with everything related to it, so a developer can easily integrate it to open data portals of the government that require that you publish that data. So that is the way it happens, but in 2023, we will see a number of implementations of data spaces that will also allow us to experiment with that and to learn how the theoretical models of the architectures of IDC, of Open Day, and of gaia-x, of which you have participated, if I hear it well, Nuria, how they will work together. So I believe that we have to start experimenting as soon as possible with a number of these projects that are now in place in order to learn how to collaborate.
Thank you very much. It makes sense.
Another little answer to your question is also about business. It's very difficult for business to know, is this interesting for me? And therefore, in the AI Act, there is something set up which is called the regulatory sandbox. And so the regulatory sandbox, I don't know if you have heard of that, the regulatory sandbox. And this allows the experiments that I referred to in the experiments for AI. The regulatory sandbox allows us to define the value or potential value in a small experiment of sharing sensitive data without having to, like it is today, to look at police law or any other law from 1990 in order to get the DPO to allow you to reuse data. We have seen that a number of important data sets, if we look, for instance, an example is ANPR cameras. ANPR cameras is a very sensitive issue regarding privacy, but currently our mobility and sustainable mobility and zero emission management on a European level has been hampered because ANPR data is subject to a number of outdated laws. The sandbox that we have in the AI Act and also in the data spaces that we can build in allows us to look at business, legal, technical and societal use cases before we rewrite the policy. What happens today is that people sometimes rewrite policy more rapidly than is needed, or we need to change reactive policy. For instance, if there's too many accidents with e-scooters, then people start mandating policy change after the accidents happen. This is part of the problem that we need to fix in our digital society. I hope that gives you a little bit of answer towards that, Nuria.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Adding on that one, there's actually quite an interesting development going on in Switzerland. So as you know, in Switzerland, everything takes a little bit longer because they do it very thoroughly. And we had a vote, the public vote about the digital identity last year, and it failed. And after this failure, several political parties submitted motions to get it restarted as quickly as possible. And today, with the current approach, it's very open and it's pretty much similar to the sandbox which you're mentioning. On the one hand, they are writing the law, and in parallel, they are prototyping the technical solution to identify potential issues. And every month, there is a video call with about more than 100 participants typically. So everybody's attending, can also contribute, they're publishing everything. So that's pretty much the counter example, or the counter example was our electronic health record, where they did it very sequentially, and they found out very late in the process that not everything what they designed and put into law was actually working. So obviously, this parallel working is quite an important component.
I think that's very important, what you are saying, the regulatory sandbox. Spain has announced that they're going to launch as a first country in Europe a regulatory sandbox initiative. I think in the city of Madrid or on the national level, I don't know exactly. But that is something that is already announced and will be happening soon.
Out of curiosity, obviously quite a number of countries have their digital identities already. How is that done in Belgium right now? Is it a central unit or is it by community? How is that organized?
Well, in Belgium, we had EID 20 years ago, and then it was connected to a smart card, and it didn't really materialize into the whole population working with all government services to start with. And then there was an initiative called It's Me. I don't know if you heard of that. It's Me is a public-private partnership which is partly controlled by the government and set up by 2 banks and 3 telco mobile operator providers. And this is a service which is the banks and the government validates my identity as, and it's in operation. 6 million people, so 6 out of 10 Belgians use it every day. And to be honest, me personally, it's a fantastic service. Once you get this operational, I don't have to use anything for any government services to authenticate, or even I don't use smart devices to make bank payments anymore. Everything happens through the It's Me service. The only problem is that it is a public-private service, which is, let's say, funded by public money, so there should be a government alternative, which we hope that the IDAS might provide us, the IDAS 2 implementation on a European scale. But at least, to be honest, it's a fantastic operational solution now in the market, which is actually helps a lot of citizens in Belgium to do everything related to government services for citizens. So that's the actual situation. And but we expect, of course, the IDAS 2 and the European identity plans to materialize and to come to some effect in the eIDAS 2 and Open Wallet implementation that we hope are coming.
Yeah, so that's the same thing what Switzerland is actually doing. So I think we learned from the past. Usually Switzerland have their own solution, but I would very heavily assume that they are moving towards IDAS, and that's actually one of the top requirements, that it be internationally compatible. Very interesting. So we are overrunning a little bit already. I would like to ask if there are more questions from the audience. Obviously not. I would like to emphasize one point which you made very much at the beginning. You said that, let me quickly check my notes, data is not about IT, and I would really like to emphasize this point. And specifically with digitally stored data, very often management of large corporation passes this on to the IT department, and my saying is that's where usually the disaster starts. So using and working with data is a management obligation. It's not, you should not give that in the hands of, to put it a little bit bluntly, from IT nerds. So it's really a management task, and that's where it should be, and not being passed on to the IT. So they just don't have enough information. And coming from the IT, I think I can make this statement. With that more or less final comment, is there anything what you would like to add, Paul?
Yes, well, that's indeed disasters that you are talking about. I think personally it was about time that we got some data governance and data management ethics into large-scale audience management services on a public level. If you look at 10 years ago and all the different drives that people were walking around, which has kind of been reduced over the last 2 years. So I think personally it's about data maturity and data management maturity of having the right professional data governance measures at any large company or company that hosts and manages large citizen data sets or sensitive data sets. So for me, that's I think in the digital transformation, that's one very important part, is security. On the other side, sharing that data or selling data is an important issue, which we are now trying to tackle in this one, because from the beginning, data, and especially digital data, is non-rivalrous. That means that actually our economy over the last, I don't know, many thousands of years has always been based on finding an economic model of creating scarcity for a certain good. And so our data is basically not non-rivalrous. That means that anybody can just copy it and do whatever they want with it. That's what currently is happening, what big tech is doing. But a lot of other people are also trying to become the next Elon Musk, owning all of the car data, or Sergey and Larry owning all of our Google and search data. That's not what we want as MyData. That's not what this kind of initiative needs, because we want to improve the life of the human in the center. And therefore, things like digital commons, which is now on the top agenda for Europe, is something interesting to look at next year. There are already experiments with what we call data trusts in a fisher village in England called Brixton. They're setting up with the people and the community of the fishing village to own and manage all of their data of the village, of the buildings, of the energy, of everything related to it, to see how they can create what they call a data trust or a fiduciary, to find some other way to manage it and to make sure that this kind of risks is managed. Because don't forget what I told you in the beginning. We are all in GDPR hell, and we're not managing anything at this moment. So if we can find a way in which we do not need to manage it ourselves, but if there's a trusted organization in which we might as well also cooperate in the future or even give a voice to, then this would be my preferred direction to go. But that's just me, Peter.
Very, very good concluding remarks. So this data trust is a question which the society has to address. It's not something that can be technically solved. And we'll certainly have a few more webinars about that one. With that, I would like to close today's webinar. Thank you very much, Paul, for taking the time for the very nice preparation. So really very beautiful looking slides. And as we said, they will be available on the recording, so you can check the slides at your own time then. So thank you very much, Paul, for your time. And with that, I would like to conclude today's webinar. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Peter, for organizing and getting all the people here.